Ah, Star Wars. It is the jolly month of Star Wars, so why don't we talk about it, right? The galaxy far, far away created by George Lucas has united so many people across the globe, but in recent years, it's a huge topic of debate, ranging from what was originally planned, what should have been done instead, who's overrated and who's underrated, who the chosen one is, seriously, what is part of the lore, and the validity of the claims of some characters. One important thing to consider when telling a large-scale story like Star Wars or telling a story set in such a large universe is continuity. For those of us who care about how well the story being told holds up more than we do seeing our favorite characters showing up and beating people up in cool ways, or just a nice story that disregards everything said before it in publication and everything before and after it chronologically speaking, breaking the boundaries set by the continuity takes us out of it completely. And recent Star Wars, especially projects handled by the recently promoted head of animation, Dave Filoni, seem to focus on telling whatever story they feel like, whether they align with what has been established in canon or not, by either recontextualizing it, twisting what was already well established, or simply overriding it because apparently it doesn't matter enough to be considered. What inspired this video was the viewing of the first trailer of The Bad Batch, Season 3. I know it's 4 months late, but if you haven't noticed by now, I guess I should just say, I'm always late to watching new shows and new seasons because of the way I organize my watch list. I avoided all spoilers for this new season and wrote down a lot of the script before the show aired. I just really was very busy this year and I've still got a lot of things to resolve. Anyway, let's dive into this. I will try to keep it to The Bad Batch, but at some point it'll have to get to Star Wars as a whole. Also going to divide this into chapters to get better context so I can make my point clearer. So there's this huge debate between people online about what's better between the old expanded universe, now dubbed Legends, and the current canon. What we need to understand about canon is that the old canon consisted of the 6 movies directed and overseen by George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars himself. Everything else was just people working with the IP to create interesting stories which should adhere to what has been established in the movies. The movies never had to adhere to what the expanded universe established. They only did so if George Lucas felt like borrowing elements from it, like Coruscant, the city planet, where even in that case it wasn't acknowledging the EU as canon, but simply making use of it because it's there and it's interesting. I made reference to it in an earlier video I made. It's really nice, Star Wars 7, how I would have done it. Check it out. Anyway, George Lucas said that at best the EU is an alternate universe, one which he borrowed elements from, but didn't acknowledge in the grand scheme of things. You might say that it was not part of his grand design. Anyone who wants further evidence of this can look at George Lucas's sequel trilogy plan, where there's no mention of Mara Jade, Ben Skywalker, Jason Solo, Jaina Solo, or Anakin Solo. There's only mention of Solo children. Yes, he was prone to changing his mind, but his plans already showed that the EU was not being considered. But an interesting note is that he borrowed a character from the EU. He got Darth Talon, who is Cade Skywalker's Sith girlfriend in the EU, to be Darth Maul's partner in crime during the sequel trilogy. Yeah, that's right. So, what Disney did is they straight up told everyone more publicly than George Lucas did that the EU is not canon and never was, and that everything published and released from when they bought Lucasfilm would belong to canon. The point was to streamline everything and make it equally important in terms of consideration, unlike the old EU where apparently there were canonical tiers or levels. According to believers of the tier system, Anything that's not a movie can be overwritten, ignored, or retconned, and there's no problem. In second place comes live-action TV shows, then animated series, then video games, then novels, then comics, with each one of these losing power of influence over the whole narrative. Disney wanted to eliminate that, which is why outright stating that the EU is not canon was the go-to move. Did it upset people? Yes. Was it the right move? Yes. But not because it upset people, but because the EU caused a lot of problems in canon, even among its own works. As much as people didn't like it, it had to be done. And if you're course correcting the right way, you shouldn't worry about whether you'll upset people or not, because if they refuse to see that it's better this way and continue to criticize you even after all is said and done and is improved, they can't be considered people who want what's best for the universe. Now then, let's go for the definition of continuity that I want to elaborate on in this video. Continuity would be the maintenance of established canon from the 6 movies without recontextualizing, retconning, ignoring, and/or adding unnecessary details to events. I also refer to it as maintaining the atmosphere that was established in the 6 movies, like how in the Imperial area, for example, the Empire was absolutely ruling everything with an iron fist, and how in the Clone Wars there was a lot of carnage and it was a galaxy-spanning conflict, and so on and so on. You get the picture. Or I hope you did. So, here's the part where a lot of people are going to start having a problem with me, because there seems to be this very dedicated fan base that supports pretty much everything Dave Filoni does. And whenever he messes up, they blame it on studio interference instead of just accepting that sometimes even the best creative minds make mistakes. George Lucas made mistakes. Jon Favreau made mistakes. Let's not even talk about what J.J. Abrams made. My gosh. Dave Filoni has many tendencies in his stories, and some of them are leaking to other creatives in the Star Wars universe creative team. His main tendency, though, is breaking continuity by recontextualizing it, adding to it, or just ignoring certain things that have been established. Another tendency of his is to create characters that he wants to become fan favorites, then pushes them so much that they end up becoming fan favorites, and avoids killing them off because it would be too heartbreaking for him. I mean, for the fans who fell in love with the characters. He also has a tendency of developing and creating masked characters that get people theorizing about who it could be, only for them to turn out to be no one. It happened in Tales of the Jedi, it happened in Ahsoka, which I haven't watched but saw a lot of Twitter discourse about a character called Marek, who has a very similar name to Galen Marek, aka Starkiller from the Force Unleashed games. And I can bet it's gonna happen in the Bad Batch Season 3. I don't even need to hope that I'm right, it's a given, basically. And the cameos. Gosh, I almost forgot about the cameos. This man loves his cameos in his shows. I've studied his pattern of storytelling, and it's actually predictable now. Now, on to the main point of the video. Remember how I said that Disney canned the EU in order to straighten out continuity in the Star Wars universe across all mediums? Yeah, well, Dave Filoni doesn't do that. He doesn't care, or at least he does a very bad job at showing that he cares. As long as it's not in the movies, let's be honest, even if it is in the movies, he just straight up ignores it if it doesn't fit the story that he's trying to tell. The most recent examples, I'm going to leave out the existence of Ahsoka Tano because that's a can of worms that is a nightmare to work with, are how Ahsoka survives Order 66. It's described in the novel Ahsoka, written by E.K. Johnston. Caleb Dume, or Caleb Doom, I don't really know how to pronounce that, aka Kanan Jarrus, was another Order 66 survivor, and the story of how he survived was covered in a comic book that Dave Filoni retconned in an episode of The Clone Wars Season 7. And fans still jump to the defense of those decisions, bringing up the Canon tier system that Disney had abolished when they got rid of the EU. They also say that because Dave Filoni created these characters, he should be the only one who decides what happens to them in canon. I really don't understand that kind of logic. If that were how we were to approach Star Wars, then the sequel trilogy should not have included any George Lucas character at all because he created them and did not have a say in the movies that were being made. I saw the trailer of the show a few minutes after it was uploaded on YouTube and noticed something that brought fans a lot of excitement: the return of Ventress. You may have guessed by now, she was a fan favorite and now she's back. The problem here is that she was supposed to be dead according to the Canon novel, which told the story of how she fell in love with Quinlan Vos and ended up dying and being buried by him and Obi-Wan during the Clone Wars. Yeah, she was really dead. They buried her and everything. She died. There was no coming back, especially since we already have shows like Star Wars Rebels, where she doesn't appear at all, the original trilogy, the sequel trilogy, and a lot of shows set in the New Republic area where she doesn't appear at all. So, yeah, she is supposed to be dead, but here she is, alive and well. I suppose the show will give us some sort of information about how she's still alive, or they'll leave it unresolved so that she appears in a spin-off show set later down the timeline. This is a huge problem because it perpetuates the unspoken but very official rule that fan-favorite characters that Dave Filoni works on aren't allowed to die. We already have word from him that Ahsoka is alive during the sequel trilogy, and that hearing her voice when Force ghosts talk to Rey doesn't mean that she's dead. I really don't know what that's about. I mean, why was Ventress not doing anything during the original trilogy or Star Wars Rebels if she's alive? She wanted to remain anonymous, right? But why? She's very vengeful. As seen in the Clone Wars, I'm sure she'd figure that Darth Sidious was Count Dooku's master and would do everything in her power to undermine his rule over the galaxy, like, say, join a certain rebellion and participate in all its major battles, like the Battle of Yavin 4, the Battle of Scarif, the Battle of Hoth, or even the Battle of Endor. It was also stated that they wanted to have her appear in Star Wars Resistance, which is set during the sequel era, but the idea was rejected. Fans also use that fact to defend her being alive in this season of The Bad Batch. It destroys the sense of dread that's supposed to be present. If all your favorite characters, like this cute, adorable Wookiee Padawan, survive everything, but don't make appearances in important battles, it cheapens the whole experience, especially if you want to one day sit with someone who has never seen Star Wars before and you want to watch it chronologically. What's that? Star Wars wasn't meant to be watched chronologically? If it wasn't, then there would be no point in making prequels now, would there? The whole point of prequels is to build up to what we've already seen established, and if you're found asking yourself questions like, this really important character is alive, why are they not around, they should have helped out the whole time, then those prequels are very poorly conceived, and that's the path the Bad Batch seems to be taking by resurrecting Ventress. Let's also look at the Bad Batch themselves. They're an elite unit. Well, okay, more elite than the ones you've seen before, of unique clones with special enhancements, and they gave themselves the responsibility of protecting a partially modified clone known as Omega. I say partially modified because the original host is a man and Omega is a girl. They were introduced in the Clone Wars Season 7, which was telling the story of fan-favorite character Ahsoka. And from the episode they appeared in, I could tell that this was a commercial for a spin-off show because it was just so heavy-handed on the whole, we know you love them and we want you to want us to make a show about them thing. It actually made me not like them at all. Anyway, they went on their adventures and found out that Omega has something the Empire desperately wants and decide to protect their sister. Our best guess is that Palpatine wants to get his hands on her to learn how to create the perfect clone so that his survival in the sequel trilogy can be explained better. It's also weird that every Star Wars show is just doing that now, but whatever. See, now we get to the atmosphere and tone of the galaxy at this point in time. The Empire is supposed to be strong, virtually unstoppable at this point in time, and they're supposed to be coming in at full force against everyone, exterminating all resistance with extreme prejudice and efficiency. But then, where does that factor in? My guess is that in this season, Omega is not going to end up in the clutches of the Emperor and experimented on, and will instead survive the show and escape with her newfound family. She will probably join the rebellion too, and then not be in any of the major battles like Hera Syndulla, the best pilot in the rebellion, but somehow didn't participate in the Battle of Yavin 4, even though she was alive and kicking at the time. But I get it, she was probably somewhere else, dealing with something more important than the Death Star, right? Having Omega survive the show diminishes not just the fear factor that the Emperor poses to the audience, but creates the sense that the Empire has been failing since day one, which again ruins the sense of dread and makes the seemingly hopeless situation at the beginning of A New Hope seem like a bit of an exaggeration on the part of the rebels. It trivializes Leia's line when she says, "This is our most desperate hour" in A New Hope. What we need in order to preserve continuity is to have Omega captured and the Bad Batch killed in the end. You can leave it at that bleak ending to set the tone and show that those were really dark times. And please, if Omega survives with the Batch, don't do a time skip to show that they're all okay in the future and leave some breadcrumbs to foreshadow cool future events that are connected to the original trilogy. We already had that with Rebels. We also saw that time skip thing in the Clone Wars, but it didn't relate to the original trilogy, thank goodness. We don't need those again. I suppose this is necessary because people may misinterpret my video as some sort of attack against Dave Filoni or even Lucasfilm. This is not the case. I'm simply pointing out a few things that need to be brought into light. Dave Filoni is a very talented man who has been blessed with the ability to tell engaging stories. I'm looking at you, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and even Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Despite all the continuity issues it brings along, it was actually a very well-made show and told a complete story. It is amazing. One of the best Star Wars projects there is today. But the problem is that he keeps getting projects that are set in time periods we've already moved past. Give him something to work on that's set after the sequel trilogy and watch him deliver less questionable work. There's a growing online community that is starting to see everything he does in all his projects, and more of them are starting to call out the tendencies I highlighted above. That's not a good thing. Anyway, I love how passionate he is with Star Wars, and I hope he does indeed take over from George Lucas, because as far as apprentices go, you will have a hard time finding a better suited one than Dave Filoni. Well, that's all there is for today, guys. I hope you're not too mad at me about the video. I realize I may have offended some folks or said some things that may seem a bit harsh, but it's all with good intentions and is meant to be a study, not an attack. Check out our Facebook and Instagram pages and have a look at our other videos on this channel. See you around.